Okay. And we've had Bill Holmes talk, and then we had that wonderful reading of Beth Blatt's play. And so we've got some wonderful things. I've got something planned that I'm not ready to announce yet, but we'll probably have our next one in January. But tonight, with no more introduction than that, we're lucky to have Margot Squire, who's long time with the State Department, and her husband was the most recent ambassador to Afghanistan. They left in late July, so they're and she's still being involved with Afghanistan, helping people who have families there who are stuck there, and so still very involved. I'm going to let Dave introduce Margot more fully if you'd like, but I want to introduce Dave Bridges, who's our moderator. He should be up there somewhere. I got to get back to screen one. There he is. And he has the Quint advisors on him. And Dave, after Dartmouth and graduate school, he spent 5 years. Please go on mute if you're not, like Burr maybe. If he spent 5 years working for a peacekeeping force in the Middle East. Then he joined the CIA in 1987, and he worked all over the world. And in 2012, he joined Fidelity Investments as a senior geopolitical advisor. So I'm going to turn this over to Dave. Again, if you're not muted, like Bob Foster, please mute so we don't get any background noise. Okay, Dave, take it away, man.
All right, Ben, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the chance to talk to Margot. Margot and I and Burr actually used to ride the Montrealer from Union Station, DC up to White River Junction back in the day. I remember those days less than fondly because Amtrak was even worse off then than it is now. And then we kind of went out into the world. Margot went off to grad school and joined the Foreign Service, spent 30 years in the Foreign Service, served all over the world, and I'll let her talk a little bit about that. Retired, and then, as a good citizen, went back into service, took on one of the toughest assignments in the U.S. government, and that was service at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. So what I'd like to do actually is just begin by asking Margot to talk a little bit about herself. After college, after grad school, she joined the Foreign Service. So what does a Foreign Service officer do, Margot? Can you give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch of your life as an FSO?
Hi, it told me that the host had muted me, so I unmuted myself. Thank you, Dave. It's great to be here. It's a little intimidating to follow both Bill Holmes and Beth and the whole crew of the last program. I'm very happy to be here. I just want to point out that even now you are undercover, not showing your name. But so what does a Foreign Service officer do? The FSOs, as we're known, we're diplomats. We represent the United States government around the world. You take a series of exams, you become a commissioned officer like in the military. You agree not to support any political party, but to support the current administration, whichever one that is. Foreign Service officers formulate, implement, and explain foreign policy. So I like to think that my husband did the implementing and the formulating, and I did the explaining more than anything. My role was to explain U.S. foreign policy, explain the values of the United States to citizens, mostly working with journalists and people overseas and also in Washington. Foreign Service officers protect Americans. You see that now in Afghanistan. When an American is born overseas to a businessman or a service person, we register their births. We help people who are in prison. We help people who, when people die, we're the ones that have to notify next of kin. So there's a whole series of things that you have to do as Foreign Service officers. I want to right now, before we get any further, make a public service announcement. So David, we talked about this, and we talked about protecting Americans overseas and the need to register. As we've seen in Afghanistan, nobody knows how many Americans there are, how many American citizens there are, because Americans don't, tell their government or tell their embassies when they travel places. And there's a really easy process to do that. I know that I, in the past, have not always done it. I'm sure most of you have not. But when I think back this summer and, earthquakes in Haiti, serious flooding in Germany, fires in Greece and Turkey, you want someone to be able to find you and alert you to things like this. So please, you go to the State Department website and the STEP program, which is the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, and it's very easy. It's free, and then the embassies around the world know when you're traveling in their countries. So
yeah, if I can actually add my voice to Margot's public service announcement. As a CIA officer, I operated undercover as a Foreign Service officer all over the world. And I was regularly called upon to serve as duty officer. So I was the person at the embassy who took the after hours calls. And the number of calls I got from Americans in distress or looking for Americans in distress were legion. And trying to find them when they weren't registered was beyond taxing. There were times it was dangerous. I was called by FBI once. They needed to track a woman down who was accused in a kidnapping case. I finally found her in a little village in southern Albania. Getting down there to figure out exactly where she was, really, I had to lay it on the line. So don't do that to your fellow Americans. Do the easy thing, register through STEP. If you have to get evacuated, it means your name is going to be on the evacuation list. In the absence of that, you make things a lot harder. Anyway, so I'll stop my adjunct to Margot's message. So Margot, you're an FSO. Your responsibility was to represent the United States outside the United States. So where did you serve?
So I served starting in Munich, then Moscow. I was in Melbourne, Australia, which was kind of a little bit of a detour and a lovely tour, but out of the normal. I was in Baku, Azerbaijan, Ankara, Turkey, and many tours in Washington, D.C. And one thing I'd say about the Foreign Service, because I know I look at people like Bill Holmes and Beth working in the international sphere, taking the road less traveled by. The Foreign Service is, it's US bureaucracy. The State Department is a large organization, and you're working within this, within the rules and regulations and laws that confine a government agency. And I think that in part explains a number of the things that were happening towards the end of the time in Afghanistan. But at one point, long after I was in my career, I took the Myers-Briggs test, and I remember what came back was I had a strong sense of service, but I had to work within an organizational structure, and so that for me that worked.
So you served in places like Munich, very nice. Melbourne, lovely. Baku has its points. Azerbaijan, so does Turkey. But Kabul, how did you end up serving in Afghanistan? Did you volunteer, or were you directed?
Oh no, it was very definitely, it was a volunteer. So my husband and I had retired. In my case, I was getting a little tired of working in a bureaucracy, and I wanted to work for myself. So we had retired. We moved from the Washington, D.C. area to his hometown, Minneapolis. We were living kind of the good retired life, and he kept getting called by the State Department to come back and serve. He had been ambassador in first Azerbaijan and then Turkey. And so between ambassadors, when people are not confirmed, it's the whole process of confirming takes a long time. He was asked to go back to Turkey. He was asked to go to Georgia. We spent 6 months in Georgia. And then in fall of 2019, he got a call from the State Department asking him if he would go to Kabul, our largest embassy in the world, one of the most important, and serve as the acting ambassador there. And he knew it was going to be for just a few months. That's what they said. But as it turned out, it was almost 2 years. But he said yes, but he qualified that with that he wanted me to be able to be there as well. And so in order to be there, I had to work. It's an unaccompanied tour. It's a war zone. So Afghanistan, Iraq, there are a number of countries around the world where we have embassies, but we don't have family members for obvious reasons. So I applied. There are a certain number of jobs that are for family members are eligible to apply just to help run the embassy and stuff. And so I applied and I was hired because he was ambassador and anti-nepotism laws. I was interviewed by our embassy in Pakistan. And then I reported my supervisor was not actually in the embassy in Kabul, was in Washington, D.C. So I went, having done my career as a public diplomacy officer, working with journalists, primarily through the time of my career. I went and I was working as a public diplomacy officer, but working in cultural affairs. And I think probably the best known sort of cultural program is the Fulbright program, or educational and cultural programs that embassies administer, interview candidates around the world. I was involved with that a little bit, but mostly what I did was support a system of 27 centers that we had around the country that were primarily for young people, students, high school, university, civic activists. There were computers and Wi-Fi, internet, so things which were not readily available necessarily. We had solar panels, so they actually worked with outages and everything. English language teaching, English being seen as the way to access the world. And all of these things were really popular. These 27 centers were in all different parts of the country. In fact, people wanted more. The government kept asking, provincial leaders would ask, when are you going to open one in our province? It's more than we've had anywhere else. Specifically, what I was doing was supporting programming that was going on by these centers and providing programs from our perspective to support, democracy, empowerment of girls and women, civic activism, volunteerism, everything from public health to environmental and climate change and disability rights, human rights. I did a whole series of programs involving journalists because journalists were being attacked and killed around the country. And so it was really heartbreaking, but very important that people realize, how important journalists are to a free society. And here I have to say how delighted I am that the Nobel Peace Prize is being shared by 2 journalists this year, and people who really fought to keep, their publications going in really, really tough environments. I probably went too long. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So here you are. You're going off to Afghanistan. The Taliban are there. They're pretty tough, pretty thuggish. And they're not alone. The Islamic State in Khorasan is there, probably even tougher, even more thuggish. present pretty much throughout the country, including in Kabul itself. So what sort of training did you get before you left for Kabul? How did they prepare you for service in a place like that?
There are two required courses. One is a week at the Foreign Service Institute to familiarize yourself with the country. And so in March, the second week of March in 2020, I was at the Foreign Service Institute in a classroom with 30 other people, and we were learning about who were intending to go out to Afghanistan, the history, the culture, various aspects, U.S. policy, sort of important background that you needed to know about Afghanistan. And partway through the course, they brought in a tape recorder, and they said, we're thinking that we may not be doing this course live in the future. So we're going to start taping all of this. And sure enough, that was the last week that they held the course in, not virtually. The week before, I spent doing the other course, which was in Blackstone, Virginia. It's a facility that the State Department has where they train people for places like Iraq, Afghanistan, these really hard, difficult places. And we learned, what to do when there's a mass attack. We looked at the Bataclan in France, and also Las Vegas and the mass shooting there. We learned, battlefield first aid, how to apply tourniquets and things like that, and basic CPR. And we also learned defensive driving and how to ram a car if you have to ram a car to get through. Now, I have to say that I was never in a position to drive a car while I was in Afghanistan, but I learned really great things that I've passed on to people, like what to do if you're in the front seat of a car and the person next to you, is debilitated, which I think is a really good life lesson. Should the person next to me have a stroke or something, I know how to jump over and grab the wheel without the car going off the wheel. So that was the basic thing. Obviously I read a lot of books. I did a lot of research before I got there. And then the basic, I think most information I got was on the ground and just talking with and working with Afghans.
So while you were there, did you have the chance to travel outside of Kabul? You mentioned 27 centers in different provinces. Or were you primarily confined? As the spouse of the ambassador, there was, I'm sure, a particular sensitivity to your personal security, or were you able to sort of do your job?
Yeah, zero travel outside of Kabul. Most of the people in the embassy never got out of the embassy. They arrived in the airport, helicoptered to the embassy, helicoptered back to the airport, and we're gone. There was a small group of people, including my husband, who had meetings almost every day outside, and he went with bodyguards and armored vehicles and convoy, that whole thing. I went out less than 10 times. I'd say about 8 times, but then only within the international zone where the embassy is located. And most of those times were with him. The one time that I got out was when I went to the Norwegian compound, which was just outside. And it was so wonderful to see like real stores and people and, motorbikes and people walking around. It was just, it was really the weirdest tour that I can ever imagine. And not being able to get out, a number of years ago, there was a young embassy press officer who was killed on travel outside of the Kabul area. And after that, they really cracked down. I mean, the convoy she was with, that she was going to visit and give books to a boys' school that the US government had just helped to open up, was attacked. And ever since then, they really cracked down on outside travel. One of my bosses had traveled to almost all 34 provinces, and it helped open up these centers in an earlier tour. But this time, he never left the embassy. So I guess I consider myself lucky to have been able to get out a few times, even if it was only in the international zone. Then the weird thing was with COVID, Afghanistan was hit really hard. And like everywhere, we shut down and everything went virtual. All of our employees from March, one day they were sent home and then never returned. So it was like offices, you'd wander around through this huge, zone of cubicles, and there would be a half-eaten sandwich or, a chocolate that had been unwrapped and left, and all of this stuff. It was just, really awful. And dealing with people like this, across distance, totally having to make relationships virtually. Diplomats, as you know, David, and everything is based on relationships. You build relationships and trust with people. And a lot of that is sharing, those cups of tea, talk around a table, person to person. And not to have that was just heartbreaking. Partway through our time, things got better. We had been especially closed because Afghanistan was hit really hard. Iran, India, Pakistan were all hit really hard initially, and then they got hit really hard again by the Delta variant. So there were waves of opening and closing, times when the local employees could come back, times when they could not. And one of the things that we had to do was go around through everything, people's desks, and start shredding. Figuring that, there were just files that went back years and years and years. I mentioned the Fulbright program. So they had files of not just everyone who had gotten a Fulbright and may have gone to the United States and had contact. They had all of the people who had ever applied. So, thinking ahead, were the embassy to be overrun? Were insurgents, Taliban, or someone to get in here? We had to get rid of all of that. So we were shredding through the course of this year, not, hoping that this wouldn't happen, but, not leaving things like that to chance. So that was very weird, getting to know people from the pictures that they had up in their cubicles and things, because they weren't there.
So how would you describe Afghanistan? Graveyard of empires, terminal basket case, yet another conflicted, difficult South Asian state. How would you describe it?
I am going to see if I can share my screen, because I have a couple things here that so let's see. Okay, so can you see that?
Not yet, but we're getting, there we go.
Okay, so just a very quick, where is Afghanistan? Surrounded by Pakistan, a little bit by China up here. Got a little, it's got six countries. It's landlocked. Here with Central Asia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran to the east. But it is this whole big pink area here. And so this is an ethnic map. And as you can see, it's a country that's multi-ethnic, multicultural. It was like most of this region, it was just created, by colonial powers dividing up the world. So you've got mostly on the east side, you've got Pashtun, who share ethnic background with Pakistan over here on the border. You've got Central Asian up here. So you've got Uzbeks and Tajiks and Turkmen up here. You've got the Hazara in the middle, who you've been hearing about as being Shiite versus most of the rest of Afghanistan, which is Sunni, and so that rivalry. And then you've got groups of of others and people, but you've got it's a multi-ethnic country. It's a very diverse country. This map that I is a map that was projecting 2020 food insecurity. So just to give you a sense of how poor the country is, if the phases, you can see there are 5 phases. Minimum food security, green, shows up nowhere. Yellow around the area of Kabul, sort of this general area, which is phase 2, which is and then it gets worse as you go on. So this was what they were projecting in 2019, 2020 would be. So now with increased drought, with the economy falling apart, the banking system, for most intents and purposes, crashed. We're in the most critical stage through a lot of the country, and most of the country is red. It's just heartbreaking, desolatingly tragic. But that's some of the sort of the background. I'm going to stop sharing for a bit now. Okay, back to and so it's a very poor country. It's a country that has experienced 40 years of war through the Soviet period, and then there was the Mujahideen that we were supporting against the Soviets. So there was war and attacks going on then. Then after the Soviet period, you had warlords, mostly the Mujahideen and others, many of whom we had supported, then fighting amongst themselves. And then the Taliban came in to bring peace and stability. So you had that whole period. And then in 2001, after the trade towers, we bombed and we attacked, and ever since there's been fighting, various degrees of fighting till now. So imagine, whole generations. We were in our 20s when this started. So for our whole adult lives, there's been war and destruction going on around. Another thing, Afghanistan there are many Afghanistans, I guess. There's an urban Afghanistan that's that can be educated, sophisticated, tied into the world, connected by internet, and then there's the rural areas of Afghanistan, where 2/3 of the people live. And to this day, there's huge illiteracy. There's lack of running water. Something like 80% of the population are subsistence farmers. Think about that, subsistence farmers. I live in Wisconsin, surrounded by farms, but these are huge, big, market farms, but this is subsistence. We're living hand to mouth. So drought makes a difference. No electricity. And something like, 75% of the fighting or most of the fighting, actually up to 90%, has taken place in the rural areas, not in the urban areas. And so these are the areas that the Taliban, was winning back. Because, more than anything, people just wanted to live in peace. They just wanted to, have their lives. One last thing I'd say about Afghanistan is that it's very socially conservative country. And that goes for both the rural elite, the urban elite and people in rural areas. Those ethnic groups that I was showing you are very, very important. They're the most important ties. They're more important than your tie to your country. People hire people hire their relatives because they trust them. They know that they can depend on them. Arranged marriages are still very much the way of life, even in the urban elite, because again, you can trust, it's a family member. Usually it's a distant cousin. It's, families are really big. So people are used to a life that's very different from what most of us growing up and living in the United States are used to. And despite that, all that we have done and international community has done to improve education across the country, and especially for girls, in most parts of the country, girls are still not encouraged and weren't until up to the time the country fell, to go to school. Over and over again, Afghan women would tell me that they were lucky because they had family members, their fathers, their mothers, who supported their going to school, whereas their cousins, girls, didn't go to school because their families didn't think it was worthwhile. If a girl is just going to grow up and get married, why should she go to school? And so, what we found was that, then why be educated? And in large parts of the country, what we think of as what life was like under the Taliban, across the whole country, where women could not leave unless they had a male guardian, a male member of their family. This was still the case in large areas of the country that were even more conservative than others. There's a picture that I have. I should have put that on the screen, but there's a picture of these 3 women in burqas, and they're holding the hand. All 3 of them are holding on to what looks like a 3-year-old boy. And because they had this 3-year-old boy, they could go to the market. And this picture was taken in 2017 down in Kandahar. So it didn't matter that he was only, I'm looking at Gina, his face is so expressive. It doesn't matter that he was only 3 years old. That was enough to allow the women to go out into the streets. So anyway, it's a country of great contradictions, and a very conservative country to begin with.
So let's talk a little bit about the Taliban themselves. So what did your Afghan colleagues say, how life was under Taliban rule before they were chased out, and what did they fear if the Taliban were to return, as in fact they have?
Yeah, well, it's pretty much what everybody has read, that the Taliban are very strict religious followers of Sunni Islam. Their plan when they came back in was to return Afghanistan to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, so 1500s, 1600s. And that meant, getting rid of, televisions, anything electronic. In some cases, they ripped flush toilets out of buildings because those did not exist. So you couldn't have music because that was seen as being profane. You could not, obviously no internet, very little contact with the outside world. You were supposed to, read your Quran. Schooling was restricted. Obviously, girls were not allowed to go to school. There were strong Islamic schools that were set up, and those were encouraged. Women and girls could not leave the house without a guardian, and only under burqa, and no sports. The kite runner, the story by Khalid Hussein, it talks about what it was like when kites could come back, and people could just be exuberant. But kites were seen and sports were seen as gambling, and they were not They weren't seen as following the tenets. There were men had to wear traditional clothing. You had to grow beards, and in fact, you had to have a beard that was long enough so that if you put your hand, there was a little bit that came out at the bottom. So that's why you see these pictures of them in the traditional clothing with the beards. They followed the Sharia, which is a very old legal system based on religious law, mainly from the Quran. And it was a very draconian. So just trying to imagine, and to keep people following these, they had, this vice patrol of clerics who would patrol the streets, and they would beat people if they weren't following, if they didn't have beards, or if women were not covered enough, or they colored their toenails. There were no businesses for women, no beauty salons. Women had restrictive health care. For example, you could not go see a male doctor, and there weren't that many women. So it was very hard to get, medical care. So those are, to get a really great picture, I would suggest reading The Bookseller of Kabul. A book, it's quite an old book, and it talks about life after the Taliban, but it's actually a really good sort of depiction of sort of some of what life was like. So the women that I knew had I'm looking at a question from Lisa Friel, but first, so the women that I knew the human rights people had all been involved in underground schools during the Taliban period. Either they had started or run the schools, or they were going, or younger ones were going to schools. And one woman told me about how her parents cut her hair really short so she looked like a boy, so that she would accompany her sister, and they could both go to school. So she, by dressing like the boy guardian, and then her sister, and they hid their books. But things like this were still, there were still kind of some modifications. A young man that I know told me how sad it made him feel to see a young boy and girl leaving a school that children that he knew, and the girl, when she saw her uncle coming to pick them up, quickly gave her brother her books to carry so that he wouldn't think that she had been going to school. And this was just in the last year.
So you're not a Foreign Service officer anymore. I'm presuming that we're using Chatham House rules, so nothing's going to be attributed to you. So I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit. So what's going to happen to men and women in Afghanistan now under Taliban rule? I mean, you described when you were there the opportunities, the sort of burgeoning opportunities young Afghans had at the 27 centers that the U.S. had set up around the country. Are those opportunities now going to be rolled back? As I presume they will. And how will people react?
Yeah, so
protests.
So the centers themselves have been taken over in some cases by the Taliban. A few of them were looted. A number others have been taken over, and I've seen pictures of where posters and various different human rights things were removed, and the white and black Taliban's flag put in its place, and a podium. So they're making use of these as meeting places and other things. I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen. But just judging from, and I think the Taliban is trying to hedge their bets. They're saying that this is an interim government. We're not going to be as draconian as we were in the past. That's my word, not theirs. But they've been really clever, in the last few years, as they've taken over areas of the country, depending on what the local sensitivities are, they've been more or less, they've cracked down more or less. So in some places, they stopped girls going to school after the grade 6, as they've now done, and they could not go to school as long as the Taliban were in control. They had also started doing things like making women stay home, making them cover themselves more, making and in one case, they were back to what they did when they were there before. They wanted lists of unmarried women and widows so that they could marry them off to Taliban fighters. And I'm not making this up. This is absolutely true. Some of these things were posted, and there are screenshots of these things. What they've done so far in Kabul is initially send all women who are working home. There was a store and made women cover themselves more. They've fired all the journalists. They've invited women back into the government where they're for technical jobs where they need their skills. They've said that they will keep medical professionals because they realize that they need to answer some of the questions that I sort of saw swirling in the chat. They realize that they need women, and I think in part because they would probably go back to separating women and men. They've closed or they've not let women go to Kabul University. So young women who are a semester away from graduating are suddenly wondering what's going to happen. It's terrible. They've separated classes in other places, literally dividing rooms with curtains down the middle, so one side is male, one side is female. They've said that they'll reopen. They're deliberating what's going to happen to places like Kabul University, and maybe when they get enough female teachers and they can separate classes. A lot of what they've done is kind of beginning steps. I think the Taliban themselves don't really know yet how they're going to govern. But I think it's pretty clear if it were up to them, I think they would probably go back to a more segregated life like they had before. I think they realize that life is different. They all have cell phones, so it's not like they're giving theirs up. They realize that there are cell phones out there. They also they really want the approval of the international community. They want the US, the World Bank, and the UN and others to lift sanctions, to reopen assistance and the banks, and they definitely will need help with humanitarian assistance and much more coming. So I think they're kind of waiting to see, and I think it's kind of the standoff between Western powers who are wanting to help on the humanitarian side and finding some workarounds, but on the other hand, they're seeing that the government is all male. It includes people like the interior minister from the Haqqani network, who is on a list of terrorists. We'll have to see, but I do know that a lot of people are already, even if they're not being told to restrict themselves, they're self-censoring. So, they're covering up more just to be sure. They're not playing, music. I mean, that was one of the things. You'd hear music everywhere. Even in our compounds, you could hear the music in the streets out there, and cars and taxis and everything going around. And what I've read is that it's stopped. That's all stopped. the thing about cell phones and a whole generation of people, particularly in urban areas, who are educated and who are used to being connected to the world, is that it's going to be very hard, I think, for the Taliban to crack down as they have in the past. And so I think that that's going to be really, that's going to be something to watch. I mean, there's, the generation X and Y and all of the younger people have gotten really savvy. There was a move, just to give you one example, there was a movement a few months ago, to stop, done in the Ministry of Education, to stop girls from singing in schools, like school classes, school shows, things like that. And, for whatever reason, and and there were many different theories, but Afghans took to, and girls in particular, took to Facebook, which is, very widely followed in Afghanistan, under the hashtag on Twitter, "I am my song." And so, singing and saying, you can't take my music away. And just recently, there was another movement like that, where people were saying, Afghans wear these vibrant, wonderful, amazing their clothing and traditional clothing, but also just in general, is just vibrant. You may be covered, but you're showing your individuality. And so, so there was a whole movement by Afghan women, just in the last month. You can't take my color away. And it was wearing, these incredible robes and dresses and things with, bright, brilliant colors. And also along those lines, just recently, some of you may have seen, there was another Twitter campaign with showing young boys supporting their sister, and it was something like "We are equals," the hashtag, basically to say that I'm not going to go to school without my sister. My sister has to go to school. So I think it's going to be I think it'll be very hard. I think right now people are afraid. They're watching and waiting. There's kind of been a pause in some of the protests and the demonstrations, but that will definitely continue. And people from outside, Afghans from outside, and those who have gotten out will keep the support going. And as long as there's internet and there are dishes and whatever people need, the country cannot go back to what it was before. And I think the Taliban know that to a certain extent, but we'll see what they'll try to do.
So the US spent more on Afghan reconstruction in inflation-adjusted dollars than it did on the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Western Europe after the Second World War. Beyond still functioning cell phone networks, what I presume are still functioning internet connections, the infrastructure that US taxpayers funded and left behind. What do we have to show for it after 20 years? Other than aspirations, a sense that there can be a bigger world than there was under the Taliban, recognition that things don't have to be necessarily as they were under 7th century Islam. What do we walk away from with after all that money, to say nothing of blood spilled? Ours, Afghans, our allies.
Yeah, it's a huge investment went into the country. I just looking at some of the reports that have come out and over the years by the special investigator for Afghan reconstruction, and you can see these SIGAR, I think it's SIGAR, SIGAR, SIGAR. The waste, something like of like the 140 billion or something like that the U.S. military got, a half to a third went to contractors. Our system, and this, even in our aid money, is by law, most of it is directed to Americans. So American organizations doing reconstruction, and not much to actual Afghans on the ground. Now, you hope that Afghans that are working with all of these organizations are knowing what they're doing. But I think that, to answer your question, I would not discount all of the people that have been educated, the doctors, the lawyers, all of the professional people that have come in the last 20 years, all the young people whose eyes have been opened to the world and have friends elsewhere because through the internet, and all of their hopes and aspirations. I don't discount that. I think that is a really huge thing. And I didn't think we should have gone into Afghanistan to begin with, or Iraq, or and I don't think we should have, that necessarily what we did was the right thing all the way along, and there are a lot of mistakes we made. But I think there are also a lot of people who did benefit, and I don't discount that. I have something that I wanted to read, and I guess this is a good time to read it. But someone that I would just ask you all to watch. Yeah, I won't go to school. Thank you, Beth. I see that. I won't go to school without my sister. Shabana Bazik Razik, who is a young Afghan woman. She founded a school in Afghanistan, in Kabul, called the School of Leadership for Afghanistan, SOLA, S-O-L-A. And it is a private school for Afghan girls, based on their ability. So a boarding school, girls came from all over rural areas and urban areas. But what she studied at Middlebury. So she's gone back and forth between the US and Afghanistan. But there was an opinion piece that she wrote just recently that I think was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times. And it goes like, this is the part that really hit me. To all I say, please do not see us as your burden. See us as what we are, Afghanistan's great loss. Journalists and entrepreneurs and artists and dreamers, the skilled backbone of the young democracy that has been ripped from our nation, the builders of a future now being dismantled, brick by brick and life by life. The things we carry are forever. They are our burdens, but we are not yours. Just in my immediate SOLA community, I see such exceptional talent, English-speaking Afghans with a background in education, in counseling, in IT. We are part of the brains that have drained away out of our country and into so many others. So there is a huge brain drain that's going on right now in Afghanistan, or out of Afghanistan. But I have no doubt that given the chance, these people will go back. And there are also people who have stayed in Afghanistan and that are actually working to keep the country afloat despite, the Afghan leadership, Taliban leadership. So, I don't, I despair in the short term for the country, given the poverty and huge humanitarian disaster that is looming. But I think in the long run, you have all of these people that will go back, will support the country in one way or another. And we've seen that all over the world when people go back to Armenia or Latvia or wherever it was.
So I have to make one small comment here, and that is, as someone who went into Afghanistan shortly after 9/11, you know, I guess I disagree with you on, whether the U.S. should have intervened. I think we've forgotten why we intervened in the first place. The reason we intervened was to track down and kill the people who planned the 9/11 attacks that left thousands of Americans dead.
Yeah.
What happened then was we lost our focus.
Mhm.
We diverted the effort directed against not just Al Qaeda but the Taliban, in support of that feckless invasion of Iraq. But the original intent,
Right.
it's worth remembering, was to go after the people who killed innocent Americans, in their workplaces in Manhattan, in Washington, D.C., and in a field in Pennsylvania. So I'll leave that. So when you and I were talking before, you mentioned that we have other classmates who work in Afghanistan. Can you talk a little bit about them, what they were doing? I want to be respectful of people's time, and I don't want to.
Right. Well,
I thought that. Please.
You all know Bill Holmes, obviously. So he has spent a lot of his time on humanitarian medical assistance directly there. Also, Dave Stone, who Ben mentioned initially, he started a business supporting a business unit supporting his business in the U.S. Training and supporting IT specialists in Afghanistan, Afghans who then have skills and are helping their country. Let's see, who else do I know that? Jim Hake, who has worked with different programs to
Spirit
provide
of America.
Spirit America. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Giving, helping with support from the State Department and the military, but again, assistance to people on the ground. So those are the people that I know directly. I'm sure there are others, and those are the people that I've had some contact with. And then there are people like Annie McClune, who just was writing in the chat, and Ben Riley, who are helping Afghans green card holders who went back this summer because people could see the country was falling, but didn't think it was going to fall so quickly, if at all, and so got stuck there, visiting family members because this happens, so many times. You want to see your family, as soon, as long as you can, and then they got trapped, and so people like that who are working round the clock to help people get out of there. So and I'm sure there are lots of other people that have, stories of people that they know and Afghans that they're supporting and that they're working with.
Yeah. Hey, Margot, this is Ben. We probably knock off in about 15 minutes or so. Do you want to just scroll through the chat and answer people's questions, or do you want to recognize someone else, or, anyway, maybe we should answer some of the questions if you think that works for you.
Sure.
There's some, like Louise had a question about, there are a lot of questions about, if you don't educate women, how you lose half your workforce, and how are you going to get people to go to the doctor if you're not a woman doctor? I mean, it's just so poignant. Oh my God.
Right. Absolutely. And that and there's a question from Phil Odens that talks about the younger generation will help loosen up the Taliban. I do believe, I think part of the problem with the Taliban is that it's not, it hasn't been elected, and no one's been, none of the people that are leading are necessarily elected. They're appointed by, some council. So it's not a monolith, and you've got, fighters in the field who are probably pushing the envelope further. And then you've got people who were, negotiating in Doha for the last year and a half, staying in 5-star hotels. and have gotten used to the West and good life. So I think, it's going to take a while to sort all that out. But I think they realize, or they've said that, the country isn't the same. It's not the same backward country that it was in the mid 1990s when the Taliban took over. They're coming back with people who are, sectably and savvy, and they're used to having they're used to having smartphones and the communication with the world. There was a question somewhere where people were talking about what are some specific things that people can do, and I just list a couple of them. One is donate to humanitarian organizations like the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, or the International Rescue Committee, who are working through organizations on the ground to provide shelter, food, medicine. Another thing you can do is you can help. As the Afghans are coming to the United States, they're on 8 different bases in the US, from Texas to Virginia to Wisconsin to various different New Jersey, different places. And I know I've been involved with getting winter coats and blankets and things like that, clothing, because they're coming. They arrived, most of them with just the clothes they had on their backs, because the scene at the airport was so bad that if you had a suitcase, you lost it, or it broke open, it was gone. So you literally have what you have. Another thing you can do is that there are 8 or 9 resettlement organizations that have been identified, and most of those are religious affiliations, so Jewish or Christian or Lutheran, Catholic, interestingly enough, because they work through networks across the country. And I don't know yet where they will be resettling Afghans. The largest Afghan communities in the United States are, at this point, are in Northern Virginia, around Washington, D.C., and California. But Afghans who have just come have been told that they are not going to those places. So I don't know yet where they're going. But if there are resettlement organizations in your area, see what you can do to provide, financial help, donate goods. People are going to need basic housing, and they're going to need, everything from dishes to beds. They're going to need help settling, they're going to need English language help. They're going to need help getting a Social Security card. So volunteer time. And most of all, they're going to need friends. They're going to need people that can support them, like the piece that I read from Shabana. These are people who are, actually the future of our country. So, think about how you can help them settle in. I know a number of you already are. Let's see.
So Margot, in closing, let me ask you, what are you doing these days? Now that you're back from Kabul, you're in the Midwest, very changed circumstances. What are you doing with yourself?
Well, so to a certain extent, I am absolutely still involved with Afghanistan. I retired again from the Foreign Service, the State Department. I'm no longer working but I'm, donating my time and resources to help Afghans. A number of Afghans that I've worked with in the embassy, who are everywhere from Germany to New Mexico right now, as they're waiting to get resettled. I'm helping them. I'm waiting to find out where they're going to be, and then support them as they start. And outside of that, I'm getting re-involved again with the 3 art museums that I've been working with here, because after I retired, I ended up throwing myself into art history. I remember spending wonderful times sitting next to Peggy Epstein Tanner, my roommate, in art history courses at Dartmouth, and And now I've really thrown myself in, because what I find is that I love engaging people through art. And if anyone's interested, I have a virtual tour on the 4th and 11th of November. The tours of the month for the Minneapolis Institute of Art. You can go on the website, free tours. And it's Native American art masterpieces in our theater, in our museum. And my theme is women in art. So.
Nice. Nice. Is there anyone, we have a couple minutes, like Steve Richardson, you've had your hand up for a long time. Do you want to unmute and ask a question? It's a cumbersome process, but anyway. If anyone, or Dave Stone, I see you up there. I don't know if you have a comment or you'd like to say anything.
Yeah, I'd love to share a little bit. Dartmouth in the 70s was such an important part of my my journey, and great to be a part of the class. But it was during that time where I really had a sense that my destiny included Afghanistan, and it was something I didn't completely understand because of the chaos in that country during that time and later. But did start going in 2002, and then opened a business there in 2007 as a programming office that it does work with our company here in the US. And I love what Margot has shared. I love the perspective that she has. I've never lived in the country, but my time in and out of there, I'd visit 2 or 3 times a year, anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. And I get to do what she never got to do. I lived, our office is a 3-story apartment. We ride on the local streets, we eat out, the cafes, the restaurants, the life. The impact that America has had on that country, as Margot said, is amazing. The progress that was made during these 20 years in terms of ideology around freedom in particular is just huge. And I think that our ability to measure the impact will be less around financial and more around this younger generation that's coming up and the impact we've had on them. More than 50% of the country was not alive in 9/11 in Afghanistan. So it's a very young country, lots of new views about how to do life. And so I think our question about what impact do we have, we might have to wait another 15 to 20 years for the old guard to die off. But I'm very, very optimistic. We have 13 coworkers there in the country. They're not Pashtun. So that ethnic picture she painted is such a big piece of the equation. Racism, as we know it in America, is really one of the key factors for understanding what Afghanistan is like. It's almost like apartheid in my mind. The Pashtuns and the Taliban are a racist mindset within the Pashtuns. And so all of our coworkers for the last 14 years are non-Pashtun. And I would say mostly because we're a multi-ethnic office, like those other ethnicities, and we're a mixed gender office. And the Pashtuns don't view that as acceptable. So as Margot said, we've got some different rules for us in the future as a company. All 15 of our coworkers are hunkered down in their homes. They'd all like to leave because they're minority ethnic people. They fear for their lives. But we've told them even though the West has left, the opportunities for them has not left. We're going to stay. We're going to do everything we can to help them. And if they want to leave, we will help them leave with U.S. visas or other countries. But we've indicated we're going to stay in the country. So we're going to have to figure it out. As Margot said, this new regime, maybe it's a different floor for women, a different floor for men. Maybe it's separate buildings. We'll probably have to have a Pashtun on staff that has sort of a I'm the boss kind of role, at least in terms of figure. We're not sure what lies ahead of us, but it's an amazing place, amazing people. And I think the question we have as Americans as we measure the investment there financially, Margot would get a great explanation. Most of that went to Americans, but Afghans did really benefit in terms of education and access, especially for these ethnic minorities. It's been a huge opportunity for that group of the population. If there's questions about partnering, There's a non-Christian agency here in the US. If anybody has any background with Boy Scouts of America or scouting, there's an agency, an NGO here in the US that supports the scouting organization in Afghanistan. It's both men and women. They're involved in relief effort right now. And I'd be happy to pass that on to anybody who wants to. Just correspond with me and I'll be happy to pass that on. I'm a lifelong scouter, so that's been important. That's one of the organizations we support. But as Margot said, we've got to get the financial system up and running again because it's difficult to get money into the country.
Yeah.
And so the resettlement here in America is huge, as she said, and it's as simple as spending time. These Afghans, for us, represent that they need grandparents, and that relationship that you build with them, having them over on the weekends for meals, letting them fix meals for you, spending time with them. The relationship piece is so important. So I just encourage you to make yourselves available. Giving is important, but I would just stress that relationship. If you have Afghans resettling in your neighborhood, invite them in their home, ask them about what protocol is appropriate. Don't hug them. That's number one. Males can hug males and females can hug females, but I never could get my father not to hug the Afghans that came to our house, the Afghan women. But such a huge opportunity and really such a hopeful future, even in spite of the Taliban there right now. So yeah, keep this up. This is fantastic.
Good, Dave. Thank you. Hey, Dave Bridges, you've been a wonderful moderator, but you haven't gotten a lot of time to say your view. Why don't you wrap it up and give us some sage or words of wisdom from your perspective?
Well, I have a, like Margot, I was the child of a foreign service officer. I came to Dartmouth after having grown up and raised overseas. It was a kind of a startling experience for me, still is. I went off to grad school because I thought I wanted to be an academic, discovered I hated academia on day 2, stuck it out a couple of years, punched out, found a job working in the Middle East for a peacekeeping force. And, I say this by way of teeing up the issue that we tend to think of terrorism as having begun on 9/11. In point of fact, it began much earlier. In 1984, the man for whom I worked was killed in a terrorist attack in Rome, which was a shocking event for me. The shock I experienced then paled by comparison with the shock I experienced, though, a couple of months later, when the 12-year-old daughter of a guy I knew was killed in a separate terrorist attack at the Rome airport, which got me thinking that people were killing 12-year-old girls. I wanted to do something about it. So I quit my job, moved back to the US. I'm a no plan B kind of guy, put all my eggs in one basket, applied for a job at the agency, supremely confident that they would hire me, with the supreme confidence that only the deeply stupid can ever have. But they did hire me. I had a very gratifying career, spent the bulk of my career outside the US. I was actually one of a handful of agency officers who began working against Al-Qaeda before 9/11. I started working against these guys 10 years before 9/11. I started seeing these guys coming out of Afghan training camps popping up in industrial suburbs across Europe. And that got me thinking, what are these guys up to? Well, I will take to my grave my own signal failure at convincing my own colleagues to drop what they were doing, to turn their attention to the mounting threat, which, turned into something more than just a threat on 9/11. I was in Afghanistan a couple of weeks after 9/11. I walked in across the Friendship Bridge that General Gromov retreated across when the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan. I had ample opportunity not to hug Afghans, but to hug Afghanistan because I got shot at a fair amount. I picked up a rich crop of fleas, but it gave me sort of this ample opportunity too to see, one, the valor of Afghans in the face of insurmountable challenge in grinding poverty. A real nobility of spirit. And two, the thuggishness of the people they were up against, who've now returned to power. I find it personally deeply dismaying. It's as if years of my life, the effort of years of my life has been erased. Maybe I'll get over it one day. I don't know. Maybe I won't. But I'm very gratified to hear that Margot and her husband were there. Afghanistan's most critical moment. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate the discussion. I honor Margot. I honor her husband for doing what too few do, and that is, taking up public service in difficult places around the world to represent this country, to the best of their ability, which is exactly what we need. So I'll stop there. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's beautifully put, Dave. And man, what a wonderful night. The chats are off the charts. It's we're all lucky to be part of this class with amazing people. And I was tearing up a couple times when Margot was talking. Me, I'm a songwriter. So, and Beth's already said they've already written the songs, but God, I love that. Can't Take My Music Away. That's a song waiting to be written. So I'm going to talk to my Afghan friends and see if I can do that. But anyway, wonderful, Margot. Thank you so much for your service and your husband. And thanks. We had a high of 92 people. That's pretty cool. That's really great. So great class, great. I learned so much. And Dave and Margot, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I know everyone in this call wants to give you a big, everyone turn on your video camera though. Everyone turn on your video camera. And so just when we sign off, we can see everybody. Anyway, it was awesome. The next one's probably going to be in January. And I have someone, maybe not as incredibly poignant, timely, but it's going to be really good. So it's going to be fun. So thank you all for turning in. It's great to see everyone's faces. I'm going to just scroll through the 4 screens. Elise, I hadn't said hi to you. Richie Brown, so many friends to say hi to. Judy and lots of people. So Carrie, Bill Holmes is on there from Mexico. I would have called on you, Bill. You're lucky I didn't, but anyway. Okay, well, I think I got to sign off unless anyone wants to say anything, Adam or anyone else, but thank you all.
Can we say goodnight? Goodnight,
Yeah.
goodnight,
Everyone
goodnight.
turn on your unmute and say goodnight. Go.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, yay, Margot. Yay, Dave.
Happy to have Margot home safe.
Yeah, go for it, Louisa.
Margot.
Thank you.
All these homecoming
Thanks,
pictures
all.
on Facebook, kids. Go look.
Happy retirement, Margot. Happy retirement.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Margot. That was awesome,
Thank
Margot.
you.
Thank you, David.
Well done, Margot.
Ben, thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Okay, guys.
you.
Night,
Have a
everyone.
good night.
Hi.
Good night.
Go 79.
Go sign. Love you
Lori,
all.
reply to my email.
Reply to my email.
No business. No business.
You get my email?
It's a global one. I sent it one to every one of you. Dave Stone, great to see you. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you, man. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks again, Margot, Dave.
Thank you
Good
all.
job, guys.
Goodbye.
Right.
See,
Margot, awesome.
we were very interested. I told you we would be. It was great.
Stop
Okay.
recording, Dan.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Stop recording. Okay, stop recording. Stop recording. Yeah.